Are we recording?
We are recording.
We're live.
The quality of leadership articles is not that great.
So everybody, just want to let you know that we have just spent about the last hour messing with our audio, trying to get that perfect. The technology out there is far from perfect, and Dan and I are far from perfect. And so we're trying to figure out how to make this stuff work. So we're trying to decompress now. So this is why we brought ourselves a glass of wine. So this might be the ASMR Sense and Signal edition. Hopefully, we'll see. So
cheers, Jodah. But I want to start off today by, this was not what we planned to do today. This episode, we had planned a very extensive episode with Zoe Fragu and Brad Topliff, two former guests on the Dark Triad. And for those of you who don't know what the Dark Triad is, it's Machiavellianism, narcissism, and psychopathy. And we're going to talk about that and the dark empathy and just empathy in general in the workplace. But unfortunately, Zoe got sick and wasn't able to make it. So we're hoping Zoe feels better, and we'll definitely reschedule that episode for you at some point.
Yeah, hopefully sooner rather than later. That we were going to do it this weekend. So this is just going to be me and Dan this week. And so what we're going to do is we're going to talk about some headlines. We've got a couple that we kind of identified this weekend and stuff we've been talking about for a little while now. And so what we're going to do is kind of bring up these headlines and kind of give you our thoughts around them, leveraging sense making and the science of systems thinking and all that kind of jazz that we kind of say regularly on this show. So anyways, without further ado, hey, everybody, I am Jodah, and this is my co-host. Is that what we call each other? Hosts, my friend and
I'm
companion.
Dan.
And
companion, compadre.
Compadre. And welcome to the Sense and Signal. The drunken episode, perhaps. So there you go.
The drunken episode. I need a drink. It's Sunday night. Had a lot of technical problems.
Tons of technical
that calls
problems.
for a drink.
Yeah. We had to take 2 dosages of our blood pressure medication. So, anyways, Dan. So, I guess we should get kick started here. People are probably kind of tired about it. So, I've got the document loaded up here. So, the first issue, and this was Dan was a big ask, is bring up your issue about these articles, Dan.
Oh yeah. So I got a little rant. Jodah loves my rants. Hopefully, you do too. So this is like the second or third time I've tried to do this before, where we do kind of leadership headlines. I did it on my own once for a little project. And, the thing is, you go into Google, you type in leadership, you hit news, you kind of pull up all the articles from Forbes and different publications about leadership. And I just want to say they're all like fluff pieces. Most of them are like fluff pieces and very shallow. They're not very in depth. It feels like it's like the equivalent of an update about Kim Kardashian, who we might be talking about later in this episode because she apparently spoke to Harvard Business School. But, I just feel like the quality of leadership articles is not that great. I think the journalists out there could do a much better job of digging in and going deeper and and finding more complexity in leadership. Right now, I would characterize most leadership articles and publications and popular publications, magazines and stuff like that, newspapers, as superficial fluff pieces. That's what I'd say. What do you think, Jodah?
Same thing. Honestly, that was funny when you brought that. When I saw that, I was like, did I write that? Because I was thinking, it doesn't feel like there's any rigor. They're not really exploring
like I saw
the,
this
the
one,
breakdown.
I saw this one article. I didn't include it in this episode, but she was talking about, the importance of co-leadership, and we've got to get rid of this great man theory of leadership. And I was reading the opening paragraph that said that about the great man theory of leadership. I was like, well, lady, you're 100 years behind. I think most researchers began abandoning the great man theory of leadership back in like the 1920s, as far
Yeah,
as research goes.
yeah, yeah.
So, I mean,
I
you are
agree.
definitely a century behind.
Yep. No, I agree. I mean, again, um, I'm curious about, like if we go deep into certain other kinds of magazines and rags, or go into the academic zone. I'm sure we'd start seeing stuff. But yep, for the
Now,
pop stuff,
academic. So
yeah,
I've published in academic papers, and I won't say, people can definitely go on the comment section and critique my articles if you want. You're more than welcome
do
to do
that.
that. They've been
Yes,
peer
do that.
reviewed, though. Um, uh, but I would say I'm not speaking about the academic stuff. And you can go on Google Scholar and do lots of searches around leadership and find some very thoughtful, dense, deep articles about different aspects of leadership. And it just, once it gets to the popular press, it seems like most journalists don't know what to do with the topic. And so they just kind of gloss over it in a very superficial, candy-coated way.
Yeah, it feels like they're just filling up with words, basically.
Yeah.
Their editors say we need an article. Yeah, and you just kind of get that vibe when you read it, and it feels that way. I totally agree. So,
If you're looking for a writer, shoot me an email. I'll be more than happy to write you a decent leadership article.
The first article we're going to be looking at here is one that I found, and I feel it's kind of timely, and it kind of touches on a tone of a show, one of Dan's and mine earlier shows that we talked about when around working from home. And so the article says, and it's an entrepreneur by a Gleb. Sorry, I'm not going to pronounce this person's name very well. Tsipursky, January this year. And the article headline reads, "Once a skeptic, Elon Musk now embraces this divisive workplace policy, and you should too." Yeah.
And that's working from home is the workplace policy?
What's that?
Working from home is the divisive workplace policy that he now embraces?
Yeah.
Cheers to you, Elon Musk.
Yes.
We toast you, Elon.
He's, as many of you know, he a couple 6 months ago, he kind of made news because he was saying basically people work from home aren't working for all intents and purposes. He was like, get off your ass, come into the office, let's get some stuff done. But it looks like Elon has backtracked a bit on this recently. Actually, this is sort of old news because this happened in December. But he
he probably saw after he bought Twitter how much he could save by closing down the Seattle offices and not paying rent.
Could you imagine,
Elon?
Do you know, Dan? You're in Seattle. Do you know where those offices are?
No, I don't work for Twitter. I don't even really use Twitter. Well, I use Twitter. I'll post things on Twitter, and it's like going into the void. I think I've been blacklisted. What's that term called that actually Musk is trying to expose, where they have the settings so your stuff doesn't really get out there?
Oh, I don't know.
Shadow banned. That's the term.
Banned.
I think I have been shadow banned. Can you investigate that for me, Mr. Musk?
Yeah, it's possible. You are an incendiary personality, and you've said a lot of rude things. So I can imagine
I've gotten a lot more mellow over the last 10 years,
6 months. So I can imagine though. I mean, I would assume the Twitter campus is close to downtown, or do you think?
Yeah, it's downtown.
Is it downtown?
Yeah, well, I mean, a lot of businesses, and we're going to talk about that in terms of this phenomenon too. But I know in downtown Seattle, we've got movie theaters closing, businesses closing. I think Amazon shutting down one of their office spaces. So there's a lot of exodus from the Seattle downtown business areas.
Do you think that's affecting? Well, okay, different subject matter. But so I imagine the rent there is pretty expensive regardless. And so, so he's decided to close that office and I'm assuming, again, the article didn't really go into detail in this, but I'm assuming some people probably got let go. But for the most part, it alluded to the notion that people are just going to be working from home. And it suggests that the main reason was because of cost savings, which, and partially due to the fact of, like, I think something Dan, you alluded to, and him saying probably how much money Twitter isn't making and how bad in shape it
Right.
is economically. And then, of course, there's this gloom and doom, looming potential of a recession that we've been talking about. Shit, I feel like it's been 2 years, but it sounds like everybody's saying this is the year for sure. And I'm not trying. I'm not even. I
think it's important to
yeah.
remember when we say recession, a recession is a natural economic period, right? You have recessions. We're not talking about the Great Recession again, and we're not talking about a repeat of that because that was an exceptional recession. That was almost a depression. So it's really important to remember that 2008 2000 to 2012 period was an exceptional. That's why we put that adjective "great" before it. So
Well,
a normal
you're
economic
not.
downturn.
You're not talking about it. I mean, others are talking about it. I mean, okay. Yes. So recession, whatever flavor of recession it is. But a lot of companies are getting in a position now, getting in the appropriate position to be able to endure something. So we've heard Google's really has let go a lot of people. We know that
Microsoft's laying off 10,000 people.
Microsoft Live. So, not good times. And let's give our love out to those people who found themselves without a job right now.
And let me ask you a question, Jodah, because you have been in the tech sector for 20-something years. And it's something I'm observing over time, watching your career especially. It's like, it feels like the tech sector is the canary in the coal mine for the economy. Like, it seems like that sector is like one of the first to always get hit when we start moving into a recession.
I don't know. No, because the canary in the coal
mine.
mine.
Okay, you disagree with that?
Yeah, because the 2008 canary in coal mine was the house loan.
Real estate.
It was real estate. It had nothing to do with that sector. Although it got hit, it wasn't the leading indicator. And then I would even suggest that 2001, the great dot bomb, which I totally got laid off and was like out of work for like 9 months. I don't think anybody outside of the .com industry was affected that much. It seemed like everybody was like, I didn't even know what happened almost. So I would actually say there is a weird disconnect between NASDAQ and the New York Stock Exchange. Again, I'm not a financial expert, but my inclination is to say, no, Dan, I don't think that's true, actually. Historically speaking. All right,
that was a little bit of a tangent. I was just wondering if that was a fair barometer, but I guess it's not.
I don't feel it is, but you know what? There are smarter minds in that area.
But it does seem like this time, whatever recession we're going into, it seems like the tech sector's getting hit early on.
Definitely getting hit early on. The question is the tech sector a big enough part of the economy in general that when you get that many people to not have a job, how much does it affect the economy? Right, that's something to think about.
And I don't think it's just going to be about how many. I think it's their wages. They make an extraordinarily higher rate of pay than most average people, and that also pumps up certain economies like San Francisco and Seattle and Portland.
100%. But getting back to this thing about Elon, so Elon has turned around. So he has decided that it is okay for people to work from home. And the article was making a comment that leaders who have historically fought this idea of working from home, and they call them traditional leaders, are going to find themselves probably increasingly in trouble as we move forward, considering the fact that the article really does think that there are many signs and signals and proofs that the idea of working from home is actually a good thing. Let me see if I can get some of those points here. So evidence shows that remote work is more productive. Now, we talked about that in our last podcast. I'm a little suspicious of that.
Let's put a finer point on that, because I think, so I work in higher education, as we've talked about in this podcast before. So I've been back on campus for several months now, kind of in a more full-time mode. I work from home on Fridays, but for the rest of the week, I'm on campus, and I've get to interact with a lot of people on campus now who, have been working remotely for months and months and months. And I think we'd all agree with that sentiment. Like, the thing about working from home, and I think the people who are self-motivated.
What we would all agree with what statement?
Well, I'm trying to get there. I'll get there.
But what statement, though? I don't understand. You said agree with
about productivity. That you are more productive when you are working from home for the most part.
I don't agree with that.
Okay, all right. Well, we can debate that. That would be that's the whole purpose of this, right? So, in talking to other people at my workplace who've started transitioning back to in person, and let me get to that productivity piece through this route. Those people who are self-motivated and you could rely on to be self-motivated and productive in person, they're going to be the same way remotely. That's not going to change just because they're working from home. And those people who maybe aren't as self-motivated and need some more prompting, well, they're going to be the same way working remotely. And so, but the difference is you're not going to have somebody there to prompt you, right?
Well,
to
you could
prompt
say they
them
might
or
actually
monitor them.
might actually be worse, actually. Possibly.
Maybe worse.
Yeah.
But I mean, there's a whole. I was looking it up tonight. I forget the name of this term, but there's this whole thing around, like only a certain percentage of your workforce does like 50% of the work in your organization, because they're super productive people, and then the rest of the workforce does the remainder. So you're always going to have
well, that's a problem. That's a problem unto itself, though. I mean, we should have that discussion. Because is that
I'm just
tenable? Is that the way it should be? I mean, there's something wrong with that statement too?
Should?
If that's reality,
Who cares about should? Sometimes there is just is. That's just the way it is.
Yeah, but we're trying to talk about how we can improve things, and that sounds like 80%. Sounds like 80% of the people.
Part of improving things is just being aware of how things are.
Very sad if they're at a company. That's what it sounds like to me. You just said 80% of the people are not happy because and that's probably. And I think that's an issue.
Maybe they're just not as productive as other people.
Yeah, or maybe
I don't know. I mean, it's a theory that's out there. I'm not necessarily saying I agree with that. I guess what I'm trying to get to through that point is, from my perspective as an individual, I can't say statistically looking at people in aggregate. I can say as an individual, I was more productive when I was working at home because I had less distractions, socializing, which is important, and building relationships, which is important. That takes time away from projects when you're having to do focused thinking and work on things. So,
okay, so
maybe what we need to do is kind of differentiate what we mean by productivity and what types of productivity we're talking about.
Sure, right, so let me finish this thing though. So the idea. So remember, the idea is that Elon speaking about efficiencies, right? And so there's obviously there's a debate to be had about whether one is more productive or not, or when at home, or how they're productive, or what form they're more productive, right? Maybe it's they are more productive in certain circumstances and less productive in other circumstances. I think you actually delineated to just a second ago by the working type of the person, a high performer or not a high performer. I think we kind of think that maybe if it's a lower performer, they might even perform less because they're getting less signals to do stuff. But with that said, the idea is that if working from home does promote better productivity, that means you're getting more bang for your buck, right? So that's one more reason for non-traditionalist leaders to say, "Hey, let me have you work from home because I'm getting these signals to say that it's actually cheaper for me to have you because you're more productive. And heck, I don't even have an office for you, so I don't have to have that expense anymore, right?" Another thing that they saw was that remote workers show a willingness to work for lower pay. That's interesting, and I'm not sure how I feel about that. Right. In fact, one survey said, for a specific example, a survey of 3,000 workers at a top company, it was Google. Now, no, Google, Amazon, and Microsoft found that 64% would prefer to work from home permanently rather than receive $30,000 pay raise. Now, with that said, I'd like to know what their baseline was. If they were making $80,000 or if they were making $200,000, that's important to know. So a percentage of their income might have been a nice thing or something like that. But what it is alluding to is that, like what you just said, Dan, is that working from home can be leveraged the way, hey, we got your health insurance. Oh, and you can work from home. So that's another thing and so again, if you're trying to save money as a company, that's another signal. And then finally, remote work can also improve employee retention. And it's even very costly to replace employees, especially given the challenge of hiring good talent in our current labor market, which we know it's a tight labor market right now. That could change again if there's a recession. once again, that would be a signal suggesting too. And so these are the things that are motivating people like Elon, who are historically saying, hey, you know what? No, I need you to come on in. Now, back to the point you were saying. What does productivity mean? Are all those things true, or especially the productivity part? And as you were saying, I don't agree or disagree with your statement about productivity being more productive, being more productive when you work from home. I have some moments where I'm more productive, but there is a loss I find when I'm working from home as well, especially around when it comes to collaboration. When it comes to moving the ball of collaboration, I find that more difficult. The article does kind of point to that problem, and it does says companies are attempting to try to solve that crack that nut, that collaboration.
And I do think that can be solved, right? I do think that problem can be solved. And before we go on, I wanted to point out that theory I was talking about earlier is called Price's Law. And so if anyone wants to look it up, that whole idea about certain proportion of a workforce in an organization doing X amount of labor more than the rest is called Price's Law. And so you can look that up. But I think, maybe we need to redefine what productivity is. And how do we define it? Because there's let's go back to in-person or the collaboration aspect. There is that relationship building part. And while a lot of that is not necessarily as tangible because you can't see the payoffs necessarily right away, it's also important because it's important to get to know people. It's important to get to know how they work. It's and how you can collaborate together and communicate and all those things that go into collaboration, which has been harder to do remotely, but I don't think it's impossible. And I think I think there are tools available and strategies there for people to meet online and really build those relationships and build systems and communicate in a way that does foster collaboration in a remote environment. So,
yeah, I don't disagree. But taking what's it, the Steelman argument?
Steelman it.
Yeah, I would say that there is a really good thought about what it means to be human, and that being close vicinity with each other and working with each other is one of those critical parts that help us become cohesive. And without that cohesion that is derived from being in close proximity and working with each other and actually seeing each other, it's harder to derive shared stories. They don't become quite as meaningful or powerful. And it's just my hypothesis, but it does lend to a counter argument. There was an article written in Fortune. It was like an op-ed by this mother who was was affected by COVID, the COVID thing, and her work. And I feel like she's probably in tech or something. I didn't get that, but this is her final statement in the article about. She wanted to go back to the office. This woman wanted to go. This was her op-ed, and she wants to go back to the office. And her final paragraph in that article was this. Her name is Blinsley Stanberry, mother and a professional. Quote, for me, a true return to the office would be signals to return to normal. I am not sure it will ever happen. The labor market's too tight, say some experts. The ship has sailed, says others. You'll only want to go back because you're an extrovert and a manager, say my skeptic colleagues. Maybe that's part of it, but in my heart, I know the truth. The office is a place where I'm my best self, ambitious and interesting and talented and more than just a mom. And if the office goes away, who am I? I'm kind of afraid to find out. So yes, it could just be simply a matter of fear of change. But I think there's something deeper in there, something human that she's saying we're losing potentially by disconnecting so drastically from the people that we labor together with. And I tend to agree personally. But I also agree with your statement. A lot of these things can be remedied through other ways as well. So I don't know what the answer is.
I guess lately I've been leaning more toward finding some sort of equilibrium, some sort of new balance with it. Like I'm primarily working in the workplace now. I only work remotely 1 day a week. Um, and that has to do with my responsibilities and stuff like that. Otherwise, I would probably choose to work remotely more often than that, honestly, because I tend to be self-motivated and very productive. And I don't necessarily tie my identity solely to my workplace. Like I would hope that I am who I am, whether I'm going to a specific location or not, So I think that's kind of dangerous too. Like, the organizations are just, they're there, right? But and part of your identity is naturally going to get tied up in the organization and the career that you work within, but that can also be pretty dangerous as well.
Too true.
But
Don't want to get
at the
lost in
same
that.
time, I think if you find a nice balance, you can still have time at the workplace to build relationships and collaborations. And I do think there's something meaningful that can come out of that in-person interaction. But at the same time, I mean, there's a lot of forces out there right now that are driving us and maybe in a different direction. I don't know,
Right, but do we
working
succumb
in
to those,
education,
or
I think we'll always have.
do we succumb to that, or do we as a society try to actually design the future as opposed to just sort of let it emerge?
I think I would hope some design would happen. Yes, work thing. I think the other thing in terms of planning that also needs to be part of the conversation as a society is the impact of remote work on local communities, right? Because we are all systems, but we don't live in isolation. And the choice of having people work remotely is going to have ripple effects in terms of restaurants, entertainment industry, art galleries.
Both good and bad, though. Both good and bad. I mean, you could see the outskirts having more restaurants, downtown losing restaurants. You can see things just changing in that regard, right?
Yeah. I just think, to your point, Jodah, though, do we want to be responsive and let things emerge, or do we want to have a plan in place? Right now, I think in our world, it doesn't seem like we do much planning. Things are really just emerging. We don't have a government that's functional enough in Washington or even in most of our state capitals to really give us a coherent plan about how to move forward. And
it's tough.
It's tough. It's tough. Yeah.
Yeah, it's tough. And, and there's, it's dangerous to put your foot down and things like that, so.
Oh yeah. And we live in such a divided country. It's hard to take a stand on one way or the other about what direction we should go, because there are all these splinter groups with their different ideas will have level their opinion,
That's
but
right.
I just want to point out, like, no solution, but that it's the ripple effect with the decision to stay remote.
Someone even suggested that the whole working from home thing can actually generate a whole different class of person, where the people who work from home will be the working class, and the people who go in the office will be the blue collar class. That'll be profitable to keep the executives to come into a centralized location where the people that are expendable that you let go on a regular basis, those would all be working from home, basically creating two separate classes of people, remote and those who go into the office. And that's an interesting dynamic that could also emerge.
I could definitely see that happen. I see, there's a lot of disruption happening right now, and we're going to see a whole strange mix-up of different classes and groups of people in the workplace, I have a feeling, in the next 10 years or so.
Yeah. And I think let's keep on talking about this here. Let's, with our group that we're still like pulling together. I mean, let's go into it. So what, let's try to design this, and, and hopefully Sense and Signal can be one of those places where people can talk about this stuff. So, all right. So with that said, let's move on to the next article. You got something, Dan. What is it?
It is called Embracing the Organizational Pivot, Leveraging the Art of Sense-Making and Improvisation by Devin Joppy. And this was from Forbes magazine. And Devin seems to be a Forbes Council's member. And basically, he picks up on a lot of themes that we've been talking about, Jodah. with Veek and the whole idea of sense-making organizations and the importance of storytelling. And he brings in the idea of pivoting and the importance of what a pivot is and why some organizations during the pandemic thrived and why others did not thrive. And he kind of chalks the reason those who thrived or survived were able to do so was because they were able to pivot through sense making. And he defines pivoting as a means to adapt or improve by adjusting or modifying something such as a product, service, or strategy. And he provides a couple sense-making definitions, and those who've listened to the previous episodes where we've talked about this would recognize some of this. Sense-making is the art of making sense of our environment using our collective experiences, typically in the form of stories. And it refers to how we are able to structure the unknown so as to be able to act on it. And his overall argument is, again, getting back to that idea of adaptability, that the leaders and the leaders are going to be able to succeed, and the organizations that are going to be able to succeed are going to need to be able to embrace a sense-making approach to their organizational leadership, where you're using tools to be able to identify that you are in fact in a complex, challenging environment, and being able to respond in an adaptive way to the situation that you're in. And he has some recommendations to think about, which we could talk about in a second here. But what are your thoughts on that, Jodah?
Dan, so it's interesting because that last article, the author, that was her prescription at the end. She made a comment, her whole wrap up was, again, in relationship to having to deal with what does this whole dynamic of remote look like, that traditional leaders are going to increasingly have difficulty adapting to this new future. And she made a comment that the most effective leaders will be willing to actually change their minds, right? Which is what this whole sense-making thing you're talking about when confronted with new signals and information, and that the less, and she used the word capable, leaders will fall victim to confirmation bias and seek out information to support their own pre-existing beliefs. Or I never heard this term before, the ostrich effect, which obviously makes sense. So you got your head in the sand.
Just burying your head in the sand.
Denying negative facts about the world. So I think it is a thing. People are talking leaders need to be adaptive. There's no doubt about it.
Well, it's interesting. There was another article related to this, which I'm not going to go deeply into, but it was based on a survey of CEOs worldwide. And the headline reads, Global CEOs losing confidence in their leadership teams. And it was a survey that's recently been done of CEOs around the world, and talking specifically about how they just don't feel like their leadership teams are able to adapt to the changing environment in terms of a number of different metrics. And I think this, all of this kind of speaks to themes that are emerging right now around the importance of being able to adapt.
And one of the things I think we're going to talk about later on was this perception of leadership and what people expect from leadership. And I'm wondering, again, I'm always critical of the research itself that is giving us this information. When people are saying they don't trust the leadership, that they're adapting. Are they looking for the right stuff from their leaders, though? I put it back on like our followship at the same time. Like, what are you expecting from the leader? Are you expecting more from them in this world? Because everybody needs to change. And so not just leadership, but followship. And are we all changing? Are you looking at yourself and going, am I expecting from leadership today something that I can't expect from leadership anymore? So is that discussion happening?
Yeah. I mean, if you're a CEO of a company and you're seeing that your top executive team is not succeeding the way you want them to succeed as far as adapting to change and being able to lead the initiatives you want them to lead, then what's your role as an executive in
Yeah.
that situation, right? Are you
What is it?
providing your team with the resources they need to thrive the way you want them to?
Or the environment that they need to thrive, right? Because so much of sense making is about setting the environment where your team they'll get to the resources, right? You just got to make sure the environment is fertile enough for them to do their job, and you've given them the story they need to have so they know what they're at, what story they're contributing to, right? So,
Yeah.
my question: you said there were some things that this author suggested, though?
Yeah, the job article has, I think, 4 recommendations. And some of these, again, we've discussed before. But one is training leaders to understand when they are in periods of uncertainty or disagreement. So we've talked about that in terms of the Kuhn-Evin framework. And we've talked about that with some of our guests, too. But I think to put a fine point on it is, provide your team with training so that they understand when they are in a complex environment or situation and what that means and what you're supposed to do when you're facing complexity. Because there are complexity theory and people who study organizational leadership within the complexity framework do have very concrete recommendations about how to approach it that have been proven successful. So it's not like there's not a roadmap to how to not a roadmap. It's not like there aren't strategies to use when you're in that type of environment. So providing training on just being able to identify when are we in a complex or uncertain environment.
I don't even think just with organizations and leadership in general, just any sort of power dynamic seems to be fraught with potential disaster in today's environment for all sorts of reasons, right? There seems to be
we are. I mean, the past 3 years have been highly unusual, and you could even extend it back a few more years than that before the pandemic, because some would argue that some of the chaos we're seeing in the world may have begun before that. And so what I'm afraid of is that we're becoming so used to being in this whirlwind of constant change that we won't be able to recognize when it's going to seem foreign when we're out the other side, because now we're coming out of this pandemic, which was a very complex situation. And now we're going into this late stage pandemic period or post pandemic period where the world is suddenly starting to reshuffle itself. And then you've got blockchain and crypto and chat GPT and all these other disruptive technologies emerging at the same time as remote work. And
so I wasn't talking about that exactly. I was actually talking more so about the communication of dissension. I feel, and again, to that, everything you just said seems to have heightened the problem. But I feel that people are walking in a constant state of fragility to some degree, where it makes it really hard to have critical conversations that organizations need to have to actually be successful and move forward. That there seems to be a light tap dance or a soft shoe when it comes to rigorous conversations about critical things that need to happen or be told. And I think it's because of various power dynamics or something, but it does seem to be
fear.
framed.
I could see fear playing a role.
It's fear. And I think that a lot of it has to do with kind of what you were just delineating for a different purpose, but the environment of uncertainty, I think, makes people feel uncertain about their position to bring things up. I don't know.
I think again that's a leadership thing, and that if that's happening within your organization, that's the fault of leadership. The leadership, it's their responsibility to create an environment where dissent can happen, where a diversity of opinions can be shared, and that's actually one of the recommendations from this article too. The job article is another way to address these issues is to seek diverse opinions and thoughts, and that's bringing together diverse teams with people with different worldviews and perspectives and cultural backgrounds, and making sure, and I guess in tandem with that, making sure you're creating an environment where people can feel like they can dissent or speak, an alternative idea or share an alternative idea.
Yeah, we've talked about many times, or several times in the past, about this concept, and in a sense making world, it's imperative, right? I mean, that has to be. Otherwise,
that's a key to sense-making organization. Diverse teams sharing a multitude of thoughts.
Open thoughts.
You're triangulating in your research with them. So you're getting a lot of different perspectives. So you have a fuller and richer understanding of the complex situation you're encountering.
Yeah.
And then the other recommendation that they make is to be cognizant that organizational inertia and history can be barriers to improvisation and change. So that goes back to organizational history and culture. And, as the Zoe Fragoo interview we did a while ago, she pointed out, in the playing Jenga with organizational culture, you want to be careful with organizational cultural change because you remove a piece that you might think is negative or toxic or whatever. Well, that might be what's holding everything up and the whole thing will fall down. So you want to be very careful with organizational culture because it is the binding agent. And so that's a good thing, but it can also impact or prevent you from being able to get the inertia you need to create change. And so it's kind of a double-edged sword. And so it's really important.
I read that differently. I hear that different. I hear that differently in that I'm thinking that inertia as an impediment to change, right?
Oh, yes, sure. I would read it the same way.
You're a Titanic that these organizations, especially the larger. So, those who haven't watched the show, I've been in product development for over 20 years, and I've worked for very small startups and very large companies. So I've seen that breadth of organizational behavior. And when the larger it becomes, the harder it is to sort of make big meaningful shifts. They occur, but they're much more laborious to make happen. There's a Herculean effort sometimes to make those big changes. And it's like,
that's why most organizational change fails.
And we call it, it's like moving a Titanic, right? You can see that the iceberg, it's a mile away, and you think you have plenty of time to move it, but you actually don't sometimes. And so I think that inertia can get in the way of, and so I think it's imperative to make sure that you check that inertia, do those assumption workshops, look at yourselves. What assumptions are we making about this progress we're making,
Yeah, that's for sure. And it's really important to understand the history of your organization too, and to do that research to understand where that inertia is coming from and why it's there, so you can divert it.
Big time. Oh, big time. Big time. Yeah. I'm going to say, and I'm sorry for all those who join companies and work with me in the past or are going to work in the future. One of my biggest pet peeves is getting new people in a company or organization I'm working at who want to make changes without understanding the current state, why the state it is that it is now. There's good and bad reasons why they are. And I always kind of wonder, how do you think that you can actually make modifications without actually understanding what were the factors that brought us here? Because you're going to be going in against those factors again. And so understanding those are going to be a huge benefit for you to be able to make any sort of meaningful change. And so often people come in with just wanting to make these changes. And I understand you don't want to get lost in the mire of history because it can be muddy, but at least I feel like you've got to make the attempt, because it is important to understand what was causing that inertia from the first place.
Yeah. And of course, everyone wants to come and make their mark and do their thing and make a name for themselves and stuff like that. But it really is important to take the time to understand the history of the organization.
Yep.
The next final recommendation they give, which we've also talked about in terms of the Cynefin framework, is implement rapid prioritization, testing, and scaling. So that gets back to understanding when you are in a complex environment, one of the tools that you have are safe to fail tests and probes, and almost using an agile method to put things out there, see how they work, make incremental changes, and keep doing and testing, and then think in terms of, okay, how do I measure what's succeeding? And then once I know it's working, how do I scale it up? and taking and having that sort of mindset to deal with the environment that you're in.
ABCD, right?
Yeah, always be collecting data.
Yep, totally.
So those are some of the things that. So those are some of the recommendations that article had about dealing with complexity and how leadership can be more adaptive to a complex, constantly changing environment.
I want to just first say I'm kind of impressed that a Forbes article actually brought up sense making and that whole domain, albeit it might have been a light approach to it. I don't know, but touche Forbes. Let's see more of that. I like it.
Yeah, that would be one of the good articles. Yes.